In this video, I'm going to give an overview of all the major components that make up the SnapInteract toolkit. Let's begin. So I have here the demo scene that's included with the toolkit, and I'll use each of the objects to sort of talk about the major components. Let's start with the snap event trigger. So if I select the lamp object, I'll collapse a few of these just so that we can focus on the event trigger. So the snap event trigger is the entry point into many interaction types. It triggers logic when the player interacts with a particular object using whatever input setup that you have. And it's sort of a plug and play for beginning interactions. See, it has a number of events that get fired when the trigger is engaged. And in this instance, we're using this to toggle the lamp object on and off when an interaction is initiated. Next is the snap toggle target, which is this tiny guy right here. Connect a reference to an object that you want to enable or disable, and it toggles every time the object is interacted with. If we zoom in a little bit, see that it's referencing this light object, which just contains a point light and a spotlight to create the effect of the light turning on and off. Next up is the snap object mover. So if we go down to the second object, the kitchen cabinet, and we turn our focus this way, see these two brightly colored widgets. Those represent the start and end positions of the move that you can configure. For this example, we use it to control this kitchen drawer opening and closing. You use the parameters here to set a start and end position. You can either type those in manually here, or you could use the widgets and configure it by hand in the viewport. And then you can connect this to an event trigger or some other type of trigger. And when an interaction is begun, it will trigger the motion that you've configured here. This would be particularly useful for things like elevators that need to go up and down, doors that need to open, close, or drawers in this case. Next up is the snap animation trigger. Let's go over to the first door, and we'll zoom into that guy in the back. So this door has an animator controller, and it has some animation clips applied for an open and a close sequence. The snap animation trigger, what it does is it references the animator on the object, and it also takes in a parameter. It could be of type bool or trigger that correspond to the type of parameter that you set up in the animator itself. In this case, we have a door toggle parameter, and it's a bool type parameter. So we've configured this to reference that door toggle parameter, and we've set the type to bool. So what happens is when the snap event trigger is engaged, it calls to the snap animation trigger, and it plays the animation. If the door is open, it'll close. If the door is closed, it'll open, and it'll just toggle back and forth that way. One thing that's worth mentioning about most of these components is they include validation logic to help you in your setup process. That way, it makes it less likely that you'll forget to set required fields or properties on each of these components. To demonstrate that quickly, what we'll do is we'll just remove some of these properties and see what happens in the inspector. So with the property removed, you'll see we instantly get two warnings. This one says the parameter has not been set. So if you select the warnings in the console, you see they select the object in the hierarchy to give you an idea of what object is affected and what fields, what properties are missing their configuration. And again, most of the components have this sort of logic that triggers in editor mode and also at runtime if certain conditions aren't configured the way that they need to be. Again, as an aid to you, the developer, so that you can have an easier setup process. Next on the list is the snap toggle animation pair. Let's go back to the front row, and we'll look at these guys right here. The treasure chest and chair. They both use different variations of the snap toggle animation pair. So the idea with this component is it plays a pair of animations on the character and on the object that's being interacted with. In the case of this treasure chest, it will play the open chest animation on the player character, and it will also play the open animation on the chest itself. So those animations are paired together instantly. The same thing happens on the closing sequence. It plays the close animation for the player character, and it plays a close animation for the chest. Similarly, the chair has the same sort of sequence. The only difference is the way that the chair is configured in the demo scene. I've disabled the object animations on the chair because the chair isn't doing anything specific in this case. But let's say, for example, you wanted your chair to animate when the player interacts with it. Let's say you had a stylized sort of game, and when your character sits on the chair does a squash and stretch sort of animation. You can set up those kinds of animations here. In the object enter clip, you can enter an animation for the chair squashing, and then when the player gets off the chair. So again, the animations are paired that way. The character animates and the object animates. Moving on to the next component, which is the snap proximity trigger. So we'll go back to the doors in the back row that will select the second door, which is the automatic door. What happens here is it uses a snap proximity trigger. So as the name suggests, this door doesn't require any input from the player. It's configured in such a way that as the player enters the volume that's defined for this object, the door automatically does its interaction, which is in this case, it opens when the player is in range, and then when the player leaves the volume, it closes. Using events as well. So you see here we have a reference to the snap animation trigger to toggle the door to animate, and it also has an optional one-shot sound effect when the door opens. And similarly, when the player leaves the trigger volume on exit, it plays the same toggle which closes the door. I should also mention that above the on enter event, there is a configuration option that says valid tags, and you see in the inspector there are 2 valid tags applied to this particular door. The tags are for objects like the player or NPCs, any actor or entity in the scene that you want to be able to trigger this particular interaction. So you could set up certain items that only NPCs can interact with, or only the player can interact with, or both. So you can kind of control what actors can interact with what objects that way. Let's talk about conditions. Conditions are additional parameters that you can combine with different interaction triggers to prevent the player from engaging in a certain interaction until the condition is met. The conditions support a scriptable object customization setup. Conditions work with player stats and inventory systems and external systems that need to tie into the interactions. The first condition-based component we'll look at is the snap condition gate. So if we go over here to the bookcase object, you'll see that it has a snap condition gate, and it has a condition of has silver key component. If we go ahead and select this, it takes us to our conditions subdirectory. Select this condition. You see a number of properties. This method name has item is a reference to the name of a function that exists in an external script or component. The argument, silver key in this case, is a parameter that's going to be passed in to this has item function call. So we're effectively going to evaluate an external system to determine whether or not the player is in possession of a silver key. In this case, we're going to look at the player's inventory, and we're going to check his inventory for the silver key to determine whether or not he can pass the condition that's applied to this interaction. So if we go over to the player, select the player object, you'll see it has a simple inventory example. If we open that up, I'll pop over to Visual Studio really fast. This is the simple inventory example code. It just has a single function called hasItem. You'll notice that's the same method that we're referencing in the condition itself. So we want to call the hasItem function that exists on the player's inventory class, and we want to check whether or not the inventory contains this silver key. So if we jump back, you'll see we pass in the silver key as the parameter, and then the inventory is basically just a list of item names. So we pass in the silver key as the parameter, and then this will return true or false if the item exists in the player's inventory. So as you could imagine, you could use this to tie in your various game systems into the interaction toolkit to allow communication between the two. Things like inventories, player stats, which we'll take a look at here in a second. So if we go ahead and run this scene, just to show you how it works in practice, we'll go over to, let's go to this cabinet. If we interact with the cabinet, you'll notice that we get the locked UI message. So if we pop out and we select case, you'll see it has silver key condition applied. Jump back up to the player, you'll see the player's inventory doesn't contain any items at present. So we can add an item. We'll type in silver key. Be careful typing in these values because they hit the match. So we enter the silver key item into the inventory. We jump back into the scene. And now when we go to interact with the cabinet, it opens because the player has passed that condition check. If you found this helpful, be sure to check out the full toolkit on the Unity Asset Store and consider leaving me a review. Thank you so much.